You begin at the threshold of a city not yet crowned in marble, a Rome still wrapped in twilight and possibility. The air around you hums faintly, as though the stones themselves remember the earliest footsteps that shaped them. You move quietly along the slopes of the Palatine Hill, where the night gathers softly against earthen walls, and scattered hearths flicker in modest huts. It is here, long before emperors, long before triumphal arches carved the skyline, that Rome's sacred story first breathes into being. You notice how the evening breeze carries a warmth that is not entirely natural, as if the land itself radiates memory. For a moment you pause beside a small fire tended by a family whose lineage will one day be folded into legend. They do not see you, but you feel the intimacy of their ritual as they feed the flames with careful reverence. This is not yet a temple, it is simply a hearth. But you sense how these early Romans believed that every flame is a portal to the divine, a quiet threshold where household spirits watch, protect, and whisper guidance. And even though historians still argue whether Rome's first temples developed from such domestic rites, or from communal shrines near springs and groves, you can feel how naturally these early gestures could grow into monumental worship. As you continue up the hill, the ground beneath your feet seems to shift between centuries. In one step you're among shepherds lighting fires against the gathering dark. In the next, you sense the outlines of future stone foundations pressing upward through the soil. The Palatine has always been a place of beginnings, and tonight it feels as though it is offering its entire history to you at once, layer upon ancient layer. A faint ringing echoes somewhere in the distance, perhaps a bronze vessel struck by accident, or perhaps an omen carried across time. You breathe deeply, noticing the scent of smoke mingled with wild herbs, and each inhale seems to loosen your sense of the present. Shapes flicker at the edges of your vision, a simple wooden altar, a carved stone offering table, a grove of sacred trees gently nodding as though in greeting. These are the ghosts of Rome's first holy spaces, humble, unadorned, yet pulsing with significance. You instinctively lower your voice, even though you are not speaking, as though the nocturnal hush asks you to tread gently through its half-formed memories. Moving toward the crest of the hill, you feel the boundary between myth and reality blur. Somewhere nearby, the shadows suggest the faint figures of twins, one more restless than the other, arguing over where their great city should stand. A wolf's silhouette slips through the underbrush, her presence too calm, too deliberate to be entirely of this world. The Palatine is no stranger to legends. They took root in its soil long before temples crowned its summit. And as you walk, you feel these myths not as stories told by historians, but as living impressions left in the ground itself, waiting for a quiet listener. You pass what appears to be a clearing, though it is more a possibility than a space fully realized. Light pools strangely here, silvering the earth where Rome's earliest communal rituals might have taken place. People gather, placing offerings of grain and wine before a rough dome that leans slightly to one side. You cannot quite tell whether you are watching a ceremony from 8 centuries before Augustus, or glimpsing an echo of something even older, an instinct for sacredness born from human need and fear and gratitude. Yet the moment is unmistakably tender. Every bowed head hints at a longing for protection in a world still raw and unpredictable. The night deepens, but it does not darken. Instead, the shadows pull you forward toward another spectral outline, this one more architectural, though still fragile as morning frost. It suggests columns, but only in the vaguest terms, a roof but barely sketched, a threshold that feels both inviting and imposing. You recognize it as the seed of something greater, the first spark of temple architecture, forming an imagination long before stone is cut or marble is hauled up the hill. The Romans will later look back at such early impressions and see the origins of their architectural genius. Yet now, in these formative moments, the idea seems to grow more from instinct than ambition. You step closer, and with each breath the outline becomes clearer. The soft suggestion of a colonnade thickens into wooden posts. A thatched roof narrows and straightens. A raised platform takes shape beneath your feet, and for a heartbeat you stand within a primitive sanctuary whose exact form historians still puzzle over. Was the first Roman temple to Jupiter here, or did early worship remain outdoors until political necessity demanded structures worthy of the gods? The question drifts through you like wind across the hillside, unresolved yet full of wonder. A soft glow spreads across the imagined structure, mingling with the moonlight. It seems to respond to your presence, as though recognizing in you a witness from beyond time. You sense how the Romans, even in these early days, saw divinity not as something distant, but as something woven into the very earth they walked. Every mound, every spring, every fire held potential. And so this first temple, barely more than a shadow, feels like a natural extension of the land itself. You move around the structure slowly, your footsteps lengthening into the rhythm of the night. You notice every detail, the rough grain of wooden supports, the faint smell of pitch sealing the beams, the tension between human craftsmanship and natural materials. Nothing here is permanent, yet everything here is important. Each decision, from the orientation of the entrance to the simple decoration along the roofline, foreshadows centuries of architectural grandeur. You feel Rome learning how to speak to its gods not only through prayer, but through space. A quiet murmur rises from below the hill, pulling your attention toward the darkening settlement. You follow the sound and find yourself standing at the edge of a small clearing where a group of families perform a communal rite. They pour libations not for a single deity, but for the spirit of the place itself, the genius loci that Romans believed inhabited every landscape. Their offerings shimmer briefly in the firelight, reflecting a reverence that will one day infuse the entire empire with sanctuaries built in honor of local gods. You let the moment settle into your breath, into your shoulders, into the low cadence of your steps. Across the hill, faint lights begin to twinkle, glimmers of the Rome that will one day rise in monumental splendor. But for now, you remain in the city's earliest heartbeat, where sacredness is not yet carved in marble but breathed into the world with each offering, each whispered hope, each flickering flame. The Palatine seems to exhale around you, a soft, steadying sigh that invites you deeper into the story. And as you begin to walk again, you sense that the next sanctuary, the first true temple you will encounter, is waiting just beyond the edge of the darkness, where the eternal flame of Vesta begins to glow. You follow the soft glow ahead, letting the Palatine shadows fall behind you as the path gently descends toward a more deliberate, more structured sacredness. The air changes first, cooler, cleaner, carrying a faint trace of wood smoke that somehow feels purer than any hearth you passed earlier. It is the unmistakable breath of Vesta's domain, the heart of Rome's spiritual life, the flame Romans believed must never falter. You sense it before you see it, a quiet pulse threading through the darkness like a promise. As you approach the structure that houses the flame, the night thins just enough for you to discern its shape. A round building, simple in form yet strangely commanding. It differs sharply from the shadowy half-formed sanctuaries of the Palatine. Here, the architecture feels intentional. The circle, the Romans believed, echoed the shape of the archaic huts from which their city grew, but it also suggested eternity. No corners, no edges, no break in the structure's embrace. The roof rises in a gentle cone, and the doorway, though modest, feels like the threshold to something inviolable. You step forward, and the floor whispers faintly under your feet. Inside, the light expands like a living creature stirring from meditation. The sacred flame burns at the centre of the chamber, steady and warm, its glow painting the walls with a fluid amber. Its presence fills the room with a kind of soft authority. You feel instinctively that you should not step too close, not because of danger, but because the flame watches. It observes everything, accepting offerings but never surrendering its secrets. A few figures move quietly around the perimeter of the chamber, their white garments glowing like starlight reflected on water. These are the Vestal Virgins, chosen as young girls, sworn to 30 years of service and entrusted with the flame's eternal life. Their movements are ritualistic, unhurried, almost like breathing. One tends to the ashes with a bronze rake, another arranges offerings of grain and salt on a shallow dish. You notice how none of them speak, yet the silence feels full rather than empty. This sanctuary does not need voices. The flame itself communicates enough. As you watch them work, you feel the weight of the responsibility they carry, an entire empire's fortune resting on a fire that must never die. Even in Rome's earliest days, when its borders were modest and its ambitions barely formed, this flame represented continuity. If the flame fell dark, people feared disaster would follow. And though historians still debate whether the earliest rituals were imported from neighbouring cultures or developed organically from Rome's domestic hearth traditions, the significance of Vesta's fire is undeniable in every shifting ember. You walk slowly along the curved wall, letting your hand hover above the surface without touching it. The stone feels warm, as though the flame's heat radiates through the entire structure, saturating even the architecture with purpose. You picture the generations of Vestals who have stood here, some dedicated from childhood, some longing for the world outside, some content in their sacred service. Their lives were both privileged and precarious. They held power rare for Roman women, the right to own property, make wills, and even intervene in legal matters. Yet a single mistake allowing the flame to go out or breaking their vow of chastity could bring public disgrace or worse. One Vestal passes near you, her face serene, her eyes reflecting the flame's movement. She seems unaware of your presence, yet her calmness draws you into a stillness of your own. You watch as she adds a small piece of carefully dried wood to the fire, and the flame responds instantly, rising in a graceful arc before settling again into its steady rhythm. You wonder whether she senses the same layered history you do, past, present, and future folding into one moment. Or perhaps she feels only the immediate task, the sacred focus that shapes every hour of her life. A soft, low hum begins to fill the chamber. You realize it's not sound, but sensation, a vibration rising from the stone floor, through your feet, into your ribs. It feels like the heartbeat of the city forming beneath you. The flame is not merely a symbol, it is a living tether, linking Rome's origins to its destiny. You close your eyes briefly, letting the warmth wrap around you, steady and soothing. In this sanctuary, every breath feels measured, every movement deliberate, every hope woven into the flame's glow. When you open your eyes again, the room seems subtly different. Shadows soften, edges blur, and for a moment the flame expands in your vision until it feels as though you're standing inside a single point of light. Images flicker within it, moments cross centuries, glimpses of rituals, festivals, crises. You see Roman matrons carrying offerings during the Vestalia, walking barefoot through the Forum. You sense a day when the flame wavers dangerously, and a Vestal collapses in despair, believing the gods have turned away. You catch an impression of Nero's fire spreading through the city, though whether the sacred flame survived untouched or was rekindled afterward remains a matter historians still dispute. The visions fade as gently as they arrived, dissolving back into the steady burn of the present flame. You inhale deeply, grounding yourself once more in the warmth and hush of the temple. The circular chamber now feels larger, as though it has exhaled centuries of breath into your awareness. You find yourself walking toward the entrance again, drawn not by restlessness, but by the quiet understanding that the flame has shared what it wished to share for now. Before you cross the threshold, you pause and look back. A Vestal stands beside the fire, her posture as straight as a temple column. She seems lost in contemplation, or perhaps in prayer. Her silhouette glows softly, crowned by the halo of the flame behind her. You sense that she too is a guardian, not just of fire, but of memory, of continuity, of Rome's fragile faith in its own permanence. As you step outside, the night air folds around you like cool silk. The temple's warm glow spills onto the stones, illuminating the path ahead. The forum lies in the distance, still small, still gathering meaning, but you feel it calling you forward with the same quiet insistence as Vesta's flame. The temples that will shape Rome's destiny are beginning to rise, and their stories wait beyond the edge of the lamplight. You take one last breath of the sanctuary's warmth, letting it settle into your chest like a steadying ember. Then you move toward the Capitol's shadow, where another sacred space is just beginning to claim the night. You continue along the quiet path, leaving behind the circular sanctuary where the eternal flame breathes in its constant rhythm. The air cools as you walk, the warmth of Vesta's hearth thinning into the night. Ahead, the land begins to rise again, not with the gentle cradle of the Palatine, but with the firmer, more deliberate elevation of the Capitoline hill. Its silhouette stands against the sky like a massive altar, waiting to be carved. And even in this early age, you can sense the destiny that will anchor itself here. The climb begins subtly, first a slope, then a steeper incline, the stones beneath your feet arranged with a care that hints at ritual as much as practicality. You feel the shift immediately. This is a place meant not for quiet domestic gods or the guardians of hearthfire. This is a hill for Jupiter, king of the sky, arbiter of storms, an eventual divine patron of empire. The air itself seems to tighten with the expectation of his presence. As you reach a ledge halfway up, you pause and take in the view of the early city below. Fires glow gently across the settlement, dots of amber warmth scattered against the darkness. The Tiber reflects a sliver of moonlight, winding like a silver serpent through the sleeping land. From here, Rome looks delicate, an adolescent city not yet aware of its monumental future. Yet the Capitoline lifts you above all that fragility, as though promising a vantage point from which Rome's greatness will one day be proclaimed. A faint clatter echoes through the night. At first you mistake it for loose stones shifting underfoot, but as you listen more carefully, the sound repeats in steady rhythm, hammer against chisel, wood against earth, tool-meeting task with unbroken commitment. You follow the noise and the path opens into a broad terrace bathed in the pale glow of oil lamps. Workers move in deliberate sequence, lifting, carving, smoothing. You've arrived at the earliest construction of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. And even in this embryonic state it commands awe. The foundation trenches stretch before you like the bones of a colossal creature awakening under moonlight. Wooden scaffolding rises in uneven segments, resembling ribs or wings. You watch as labourers haul blocks of tufa up the slope, their silhouettes straining against the weight. The scale is astonishing, far greater than any structure Rome has yet known. This is not merely a temple, it is a declaration, a promise to the gods, and perhaps more importantly, a promise to the world. Historians still argue whether the earliest design was purely Etruscan, or whether Roman influence already pushed it towards something uniquely grand. But as you stand here, witnessing its creation firsthand, the debate feels almost irrelevant. What matters is the force of intention behind each stone placed. You can feel it in the ground beneath you, a vibration of purpose, of ambition, not yet spoken but already undeniable. You wander closer, careful not to disturb the workers who move with almost ritualistic precision. A master builder stands near the edge of the terrace, his hands white with dust as he traces plans onto a wooden board. His gestures are sharp, confident. He's explaining something to a group of apprentices, pointing toward the rising columns that will one day support the temple's massive roof. Though you cannot hear his words clearly, you sense his conviction. The temple must be worthy of the gods, and equally worthy of the city that seeks their favour. As a breeze sweeps across the terrace, it carries with it the scent of freshly split timber and damp earth. Lantern flames flicker, briefly casting the workers' shadows in giant proportions against the skeletal framework of the rising structure. Their silhouettes look almost divine in scale, as though the gods themselves are assisting with the labour. The imagery is so striking that you find yourself holding your breath, watching the interplay of shadow, stone, and human effort. A young worker, barely more than a boy, passes near you. He carries a basket of smaller stones, his face streaked with dust, his eyes bright with pride. Though he cannot see you, you sense his awareness of participating in something profound, an act that will echo long after his own life ends. He pauses briefly, gazing toward the horizon where dawn will soon bloom. In his posture you read a silent vow. This temple will stand as proof that Rome honours its gods with unwavering devotion. You move deeper into the construction site, stepping carefully around bundles of timber, coils of rope, and stacks of fired clay tiles waiting for installation. Everywhere you look, there is motion. Workers smoothing plaster onto wooden forms, artisans sketching decorative motifs that will one day adorn the pediments, architects debating measurements with a passion that borders on reverence. The atmosphere is electric with concentration, and yet also strangely meditative. Every task, no matter how mundane, feels like a component of sacred creation. A group of artisans gathers around a large slab of stone near the eastern edge of the terrace. They are carving what will become part of Jupiter's statue. At this stage the features are rough, only the suggestion of a powerful brow, the faintest outline of a beard. But even in this incomplete form, you feel the emerging presence of the King of Gods. Thunder seems to whisper in the distance, although the sky is clear and calm. You wonder whether the artisans hear it too, or whether the sensation exists only in your perception, amplified by the intensity of this place. The chief sculptor steps forward, examining his work with narrowed eyes. He lifts a tool, pauses in contemplation, then strikes a precise blow that sends a small cascade of dust drifting into the night air. The act is quiet, almost delicate, yet it carries extraordinary weight. You sense that each touch of the chisel is not merely shaping stone, it is summoning divinity. Beyond the artisans, a group of priests stands in quiet discussion. Their robes flutter slightly in the breeze as they gesture toward the unfinished cellar, the innermost chamber where Jupiter's statue will reside. From their solemn expressions, you sense they are planning the rituals that will consecrate the temple upon completion. The details of those rites have long fascinated scholars. Some believe they blended Etruscan traditions with early Roman customs, while others argue the ceremony was uniquely Roman from the start. But tonight, the priests seem unconcerned with how future historians will interpret their actions. Their focus is immediate, ensuring the gods approve of each step taken. As you walk through the site, absorbing every sound and texture, you notice how the night amplifies the sense of magic surrounding the construction. Lanterns glow like captive stars. Dust sparkles as it drifts through beams of light. The rhythmic strike of tools becomes a kind of heartbeat, steady and grounding. Even the silence between tasks feels sacred, charged with the anticipation of a future in which this temple will dominate the skyline. Eventually you reach the edge of the terrace, where the land drops sharply into shadow. From here, the entire city unfurls before you in quiet slumber. You imagine the dawn that will one day break above a fully realized temple, columns gleaming, rooflines sharp against the morning light, statues commanding admiration from every passerby. You imagine how future generations will climb this hill seeking protection, justice, or favour, and you see in your mind's eye the countless triumphal processions that will end here, offering spoils from far corners of the world to Jupiter's towering sanctuary. But tonight, the temple is still becoming, still drawing breath, still gathering form, and standing here you feel privileged to witness its earliest heartbeat, before marble and grandeur fossilize it into the monument known to history. A final gust of wind rises from the valley, sweeping across the terrace and lifting a thin veil of dust into the air. It drifts toward the unfinished columns, catching the lantern light in a shimmering dance. Then the wind softens, fading into a whisper as you turn away from the terrace, ready to let the unfolding city guide your next steps. Below the hill, the Forum waits, its sacred spaces expanding, its future temples stirring in the dark like ideas waiting to awaken. You descend from the Capitoline terrace with the rhythmic echoes of chisels still resonating in your ears, each faint strike fading into the night like the last beats of a distant drum. As you make your way down the slope, the darkness loosens, allowing the city's heart to reveal itself. The early Forum, not yet the marble-clad spectacle it will become, but already pulsing with intention. It spreads before you as an uneven valley of half-shaped spaces, markets by day, gathering grounds by evening, and spiritual crossroads at every hour. The path widens as you approach the valley floor, and the air thickens with a different kind of energy, not the sacred hush of Vesta's flame, nor the thunderous ambition of Jupiter's rising temple. This is something more restless, more layered. The Forum is a place where daily life and divine devotion merge so thoroughly that neither feels complete without the other. Even now, in its early form, you sense its dual nature, a civic centre that is also a sacred stage. You cross the threshold almost without realizing it. The ground beneath your feet shifts from the natural slope of the hill to a space packed firm by years of footsteps. Ahead, small shrines and altars cluster in shapes that feel random at first glance, but soon reveal a subtle order. You see offerings left for gods whose names have not survived into later centuries, local spirits, protective deities of springs and crossroads, early ancestral powers who watch quietly from the margins. Their altars are modest, often little more than carved stones or wooden stumps, but each one glows faintly under the moonlight, as though reluctant to be forgotten. A breeze moves through the Forum, stirring the remnants of the day's business, reeds from woven baskets, dust from trampled pathways, the faint scent of fruits long gathered. Yet beneath the earthly aromas you sense something deeper, a kind of spiritual residue from countless rituals that have taken place here. Sacrifices offered in anxious hope, prayers whispered beneath breath, vows made before battle, gratitude given after safe returns. All of it lingers suspended in the cool night air. As you walk, the scattered sacred sites begin to align themselves into a pattern, an expanding constellation of temples that reflect Rome's evolving identity. You approach a small structure, still wrapped in scaffolding. Workers have long since left for the night, but the half-completed temple stands open to your gaze. Its columns are shorter than the ones rising on the Capitoline, carved with less confidence and fewer decorative flourishes. Yet the intention behind them is unmistakably earnest. These stones do not aim to rival Jupiter's future grandeur, but to honour a deity whose presence anchors the community just as surely. You move closer and notice the doorway, framed by freshly cut blocks still bearing the marks of chisels. Inside, the faint outlines of a cellar take shape, the walls marked with sketches of what will one day be painted murals. Standing in the threshold, you try to imagine the rituals that will soon unfold here, the incense curling into the rafters, the murmured prayers of magistrates, the footsteps of citizens seeking protection or favour. The temple seems to sigh faintly in the breeze, as though aware that its purpose is taking form even before its roof is set in place. Continuing on, you weave through clusters of early vendors' platforms, the wooden planks creaking softly under your steps. At this hour, the marketplace is empty, but its daytime chaos has left behind an echo that clings to the space. You picture the bustle, olives and grain traded for bronze tools, mothers bartering for wool, magistrates greeting citizens with the gravity of those who balance politics and piety. Temples rise among all this activity, not separate from the life of the city but woven into its daily rhythm. The moon emerges from a drift of clouds, washing the forum in pale silver, and the shapes of more permanent structures begin to sharpen. You see the outlines of early basilicas, long before they evolve into the iconic Christian architecture that will redefine Rome centuries later. Right now, they are simply gathering halls, places of commerce, justice, and public debate. But even here, the sacred blends with the civic. Carved plaques depict gods overseeing transactions, reminding every Roman that business itself is a kind of offering. You cross the centre of the forum, and a sudden stillness settles over you. Ahead stands one of the earliest temples completed on this ground, small compared to the giants that will one day surround it, but commanding in its presence. Its stone platform is raised slightly above the earth, giving it a quiet authority. Its columns stand evenly spaced, each one catching the moonlight along its grooves. You cannot see the deity's image inside from this distance, but the air around the temple hums with the warmth of lingering devotion. Stepping closer, you feel the shift in atmosphere. This sanctuary belongs to a deity of protection, one invoked by those who feared the dangers lurking beyond the city's fragile borders. The temple seems to listen as you approach. It's not empty, but attentive. You imagine the people who have visited it today, farmers bringing first fruits, soldiers asking for safe passage, families appealing for health. Their thoughts, hopes, and fears linger in the very stones. You place a hand on the temple's foundation, and the cool surface vibrates faintly with centuries of prayer. As you withdraw your hand, a new sound enters the forum, the distant clatter of wheels approaching along a stone road. A modest cart turns the corner, pulled by a tired mule and guided by a priest carrying a lantern. The warm light flickers across his face, revealing deep-set eyes and a serenity born of ritual repetition. He carries offerings wrapped in linen, perhaps for a morning ceremony. He does not look your way, yet you sense his awareness of the sacred space he moves through. His steps are measured, respectful, each footfall echoing the gravity of tradition. You follow him at a distance, watching as he stops before a small shrine cradled between two larger structures. The shrine is dedicated to a lesser-known god, one of thresholds or boundaries perhaps, judging by the carved symbols above the doorway. The priest kneels, unwraps his offerings, and murmurs words you cannot fully hear, yet the emotion behind them is unmistakable, a quiet plea for protection, not just for individuals, but for the city growing around them. When he rises, he touches the shrine's lintel lightly, as one might touch the shoulder of a trusted friend. Then he continues on, lantern swaying gently. You linger at the shrine after he departs, feeling the residual warmth of devotion. These smaller shrines, often overshadowed by grand temples, play an equally vital role in shaping Rome's sacred landscape. They anchor the everyday. They guard crossroads, markets, doorways. They serve as the spiritual glue binding together citizens who may never climb the Capitoline or enter Jupiter's vast sanctuary. In their simplicity, they reflect the practical spirituality of early Romans, gods near at hand, solutions woven into the patterns of daily life. As you step back into the open forum, the sky begins to lighten just enough to blur the stars. A subtle glow touches the eastern horizon, though dawn is still far off. The not yet morning illuminates the forum in a dreamlike glaze. Half-built temples appear sturdier in this silver wash. Completed ones glow with a muted radiance. Empty spaces seem to expand, ready to cradle future structures. You realize as you stand in the center of this evolving landscape that the forum is not merely growing outward. It is growing upward, layer upon layer, ambition upon ambition. Each temple, no matter how small or grand, is a declaration of Rome's changing identity. In your mind you glimpse the future skyline, a forest of columns, pediments etched with myth, bronze statues gleaming under relentless sunlight. But for now, the forum is just beginning to find its shape, and the temples rising here are its first attempts at defining its own mythology. A final breeze moves through the valley, and the sacred structures seem to breathe with it, stone inhaling moonlight, wood exhaling the day's lingering heat. You feel the city's heart thump gently beneath your feet, a slow, steady rhythm guiding you onward. And ahead, just beyond the edge of the forum, the gleaming promise of another sanctuary begins to emerge. One dedicated to twins whose legend will soon become woven into Rome's identity, their columns rising in silver anticipation against the dark. You feel the forum settling behind you like a great slow-moving tide, its sacred murmurs fading into the hush of the approaching dawn. Yet something ahead gleams faintly, even before the sun has the chance to reach it. It is not marble, not yet, but the polished sheen of freshly cut stone, the early promise of a sanctuary rising, with a confidence that seems almost premature for this young city. You move toward it, guided by a sense that this temple story is woven not only into Rome's history, but into its mythology, its military identity, its very sense of destiny. As you draw nearer, two shapes emerge, shimmering faintly in the half-light. At first they seem like tricks of the eye, twin silhouettes standing where no workers linger at this hour. Then you realize they are not physical forms, but impressions, echoes of Castor and Pollux themselves, the legendary Dioscuri whose presence Romans believed could turn the tide of battle. Their outlines glow with a quiet intensity, like reflections on still water, and though they do not speak, you feel the steadiness of their gaze settling on you as you approach the temple built in their honor. The ground beneath your feet is packed from recent labor. Chisel marks scatter across unused stone blocks, and scaffolding frames the temple with the stark geometry of work not yet complete. But the essential structure, the podium, the rising columns, the broad stairway, already conveys the authority of victory. This sanctuary was vowed after the Battle of Lake Regillus, a conflict so steeped in legend that historians still argue where the boundary lies between fact and myth. Did the twins truly appear on horseback, urging Roman fighters onward? Or was their intervention a story polished by generations seeking divine validation? As you stand before the temple, the question feels less important than the devotion it inspired. You ascend the steps slowly, each one cool beneath your sandals as the first hints of dawn brush the sky. At the top, the unfinished colonnade rises around you like a grove of stone trees, their fluted shafts catching the faintest glimmer of morning. The capitals, though incomplete, already suggest the elegance that will one day crown them. You step between two of the columns and enter the threshold of the future cellar, where shadows pool like dark water. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of mortar and timber. Wooden beams crisscross above you, supporting a roof that has yet to take its final form. The space feels larger than its physical dimensions, as though the stories attached to it have already filled it to the corners. You close your eyes for a moment, and the silence deepens into a kind of atmospheric memory. You can almost hear the clash of weapons, the rush of horses, the roar of soldiers invoking the Dioscuri at their moment of greatest desperation. When you open your eyes again, the space seems subtly transformed. Not changed exactly, but clarified. You feel the temple's identity solidifying around you. This is not a quiet household shrine or a modest altar tucked between the forum's bustling quarters. This is a declaration of victory, a monument to divine intervention, a public reminder that Rome's triumphs are never purely mortal. A faint light brightens near the rear of the cellar, and you realize it comes from an unlit niche carved into the back wall. The sun, still below the horizon, has begun to send the thinnest ray of light upwards, bouncing off the pale stone like a whisper of illumination. In the niche, sculptors have begun shaping the figures of the twins. Their torsos are still crude forms, lacking detail, but even in unfinished stone you can sense their strength. One stands slightly forward of the other, as though ready to charge. The second's posture leans subtly in the opposite direction, creating a balance. Two forces complementary, inseparable, eternally paired. Workers left their tools neatly arranged at the base of the niche. Hammers, chisels, brushes for dust. You kneel for a moment, running your fingers just above the surface of one tool, allowing yourself to feel the residue of the day's labour. The air above the chisel still holds the slightest warmth, as though touched only moments ago. These artisans work not only for their city but for their gods, and the sincerity of that devotion clings to everything they shape. A soft vibration runs through the temple floor, so faint you might have mistaken it for your own heartbeat echoing in stone. Then the vibration becomes more distinct. Hoofbeats, slow, rhythmic, almost ceremonious. You turn toward the entrance just as two forms materialize at the edge of the colonnade, their outlines shimmering like heat on desert rock. They are the Dioscuri again, no longer distant silhouettes, but closer, clearer, though still woven from light and myth rather than flesh. Their horses, taller than any mortal beast, stand proud and calm, manes flowing as though stirred by a wind you cannot feel. For a moment, the entire temple glows with their presence. The unfinished columns take on a soft radiance. The scaffolding fades into the background, irrelevant to the divine moment unfolding. Castor lifts a hand in greeting, an acknowledgement, not a summons, and Pollux inclines his head, his expression both solemn and reassuring. They do not linger. In a single breath they dissolve into brightness, leaving the temple once again anchored to the physical world. Yet the space where they stood continues to hum long after they vanish, as though remembering their shape. You remain still, letting the silence reorganize itself around you. Slowly you rise and walk back toward the entrance. This time the colonnade feels different, no longer skeletal but anticipatory. The temple knows it is on the verge of becoming complete, of taking its place among Rome's sacred architecture as a symbol of praection, victory, and divine partnership. It feels alive in the same subtle way Vesta's flame breathed warmth into her sanctuary. Outside, dawn finally breaches the horizon in a thin band of gold. The light spreads across the forum, touching rooftops, grazing statues, spilling gently over the temple's broad stairway. You stand on the steps and watch the city wake. Merchants emerge from shadowed alleys to prepare their stalls. Priests carry offerings wrapped in cloth. Citizens gather in small clusters to exchange the first words of the day. Rome yawns and stretches, unaware that you have just witnessed the lingering memory of a miracle etched into the stone itself. A cart creaks nearby and a pair of workers unload tiles destined for the temple roof. One of them pauses, staring up at the rising structure with a mixture of pride and awe. The way he looks at it, like a promise fulfilled, reminds you that temples are not built solely of stone. They are built of belief, victory, gratitude and stories that outlive the people who tell them. You step down into the forum once more, letting the light guide your movements. The temple of the Dioscuri gleams behind you, still incomplete but already powerful, already vibrant with myth. Ahead, the city stretches into its day, and you sense that more sanctuaries, more stories lie waiting in its unfolding streets. Somewhere beyond the marketplace, triumphal arches and dedicatory temples begin to glow softly, warmed by the rising sun. They call to you with the faint echo of marching footsteps, the sound of victory parades, the promise of gods invoked in gratitude by returning generals. And you follow that call, letting the growing brightness lead you toward the next sacred threshold of Rome. The light of morning broadens across the forum as you move away from the temple of the Dioscuri, its luminous columns still catching the rising sun as though polishing themselves in gold. You slip into the flow of early Roman life, the shuffle of merchants arranging their wares, the murmured greetings of magistrates beginning their public duties, the distant clatter of hooves somewhere beyond the streets. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythms you feel another current stirring. It is slow at first, a subtle vibration in the stones, a breath held by the city as it waits for something grander to begin. That something arrives in fragments, a horn's bright call cutting through the morning haze, the growing rumble of wheels and armour, the whispers of anticipation spreading from stall to stall. You turn toward the sound just as a column of soldiers appears at the far end of the forum. They move with weary precision, their armour dulled by travel, their faces etched with the grit of exhaustion. Yet pride steadies their steps. They have returned from war, victorious, and now they march toward the sacred monuments where triumph must be acknowledged. A triumphal procession in these early centuries is not yet the elaborate spectacle it will one day become. Still, you feel the gravity of the moment settle around you as citizens gather along the edges of the forum to watch. Children crane their necks to glimpse the tall standards carried high above the soldiers. Older men nod with solemn recognition, remembering their own campaigns. Women clasp their hands, perhaps in relief, perhaps in gratitude. And above it all rises a murmur that seems half human, half divine, as though the gods themselves lean into witness. The general appears on a chariot near the centre of the procession, his purple-edged toga fluttering in the breeze. Dust clings to the hem, refusing to be shaken free, reminding you that victory is never as pristine as the stories claim. Yet he holds himself with the dignity of someone who knows the city owes him this moment. Behind him follow wagons bearing the spoils of war, bronze shields, woven tapestries, jars of coin, carved idols taken from conquered cities. Each item is both offering and declaration, Rome's expansion etched into tangible form. You fall into step at the procession's outer edge, feeling the rhythm of the movement draw you forward. A horn sounds again, sharper this time, and the soldiers begin to chant. Their voices rise and fall with a cadence that resonates through the entire forum, bouncing off the walls of basilicas, reverberating against unfinished temples, weaving the present moment into the very architecture. The chant is not merely celebration, it is invocation. Each syllable calls upon the gods who watched the battle unfold, who steadied hands and hardened shields, who ensured the soldiers' return. The procession slows as it nears a cluster of temples. Even at its earliest stage, the forum is already a sacred grid, each structure aligned with a deity whose domain shapes Roman life. The general dismounts, stepping from his chariot with deliberate grace. His boots hit the ground in a sound that seems louder than it should be, as though amplified by the earth itself. He carries a laurel branch in his left hand, a spear in his right, and for a moment he stands perfectly still. Silence spreads around him like a ripple. Then he turns toward the first temple, the sanctuary of Saturn. The stone facade, worn and humble in these early centuries, nevertheless carries an air of antiquity. It is one of the Forum's eldest deities, a god tied to agriculture, time, and the deep, mysterious memory of Rome's prehistory. The general ascends the steps, and his soldiers halt below. You watch as he lays the laurel upon the altar, bowing his head. It is a gesture of acknowledgement, offering, and humility, a reminder that victories are never fully mortal achievements. Saturn's priests appear, their robes barely stirring in the morning breeze. One of them steps forward, tracing a symbol in the air that you do not recognize but feel, somehow with surprising clarity. The energy shifts around the altar, thickening, warming, as though the stones themselves are answering. The general descends the steps again, moving toward the next sacred site. The procession continues its slow pilgrimage through the Forum's constellation of deities. At each temple, a different aspect of Rome's triumph is acknowledged. At the shrine of Victoria, the goddess of victory, the soldiers raise their shields in a synchronized movement that catches the sunlight in a sudden burst of brightness. At the altar of Mars, red cloth ripples as priests offer incense, the smoke spiraling upward like a plea for continued strength. At the small yet fervently revered shrine of Janus, the god of doorways and transitions, the procession pauses for a heartbeat, recognizing that war is a threshold, and so is peace. You notice how even the buildings respond. Columns seem to straighten, shadows sharpen, the air gather density as each temple receives its due. This is not spectacle alone, it is exchange. Romans give thanks, and in return their gods fortify the city with a sense of purpose. The Forum transforms from marketplace to ceremonial artery, its heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of prayer and procession. Eventually the general and his retinue approach the grand axis leading toward the Capitoline Hill. Though Jupiter's temple is not yet fully complete, its rising form commands attention. The general gazes up at the unfinished sanctuary with a mixture of anticipation and reverence. You sense his desire, perhaps even his impatience, to one day dedicate spoils directly to the King of Gods under a roof carved to honor thunder itself. But for now he turns toward the existing altar at the foot of the hill. Here the procession reaches its crescendo. Soldiers form a wide semicircle, shields grounded, spears angled slightly outward. Citizens gather behind them, filling the slope until the crowd resembles a great wave, frozen just before cresting. The general steps forward, holding a jar heavy with coin taken from the conquered city. He lifts it high, letting the sun catch its surface, then pours its contents onto the altar. The cascade of metal rings through the air like a chorus of tiny bells. As the last coin settles, the general raises his arms. He does not speak loudly, yet his voice carries, as though borne on a wind stirred by unseen hands. He names the gods who guided him, the soldiers who stood beside him, the city to which he returns. He dedicates his triumph not as ownership but as offering. The air sharpens. You feel a sudden electric tremor beneath your feet, not violent but profound, as though the earth acknowledges the ritual. A breeze sweeps across the Forum, picking up dust and prayer in equal measure. The general lowers his arms, and the soldiers respond with a unified strike of their spears against the ground. The sound is immense. It booms through the valley, rattling the scaffolding around the Dioscuri's temple, vibrating the earlier stones of the basilicas, echoing off the rising form of Jupiter's sanctuary. For a moment, you feel suspended in time, caught between what Rome is and what it will become. Temples will multiply, triumphs will grow extravagant, and generals will seek immortality through monuments. But here, in this formative moment, you witness the pure essence of Rome's sacred relationship with victory. Slowly the procession begins to dissolve. Soldiers peel away toward barracks, Citizens return to their markets. Priests gather offerings for later rites. The forum breathes out, releasing the tension of ceremony. You step aside as a group of younger soldiers strides past, their faces bright with the thrill of participation. One of them carries a fragment of a foreign idol, broken during the campaign, now destined to be dedicated as a symbol of submission. He holds it carefully, strangely tender toward the very thing he has helped conquer. As the crowd thins, the city resumes its more familiar rhythm, yet the air remains charged, as though the gods linger a little longer, savouring the offerings made in their honour. And as you walk once more, following the winding paths of devotion that thread through this growing city, you sense another force calling to you, not from the Forum, not from the Capitoline, but from beyond the edge of Rome itself. A rhythm foreign, pulsing, alive with drums and cymbals, a goddess travelling across sea and memory, ready to unsettle and enchant in equal measure. The Magna Mater is approaching. You feel the shift almost before you hear it, a subtle stirring in the air, as though the city is inhaling in anticipation, bracing itself for something unfamiliar. The solemn echoes of the triumphal offering still linger across the Forum, but a new sound begins to rise from the eastern outskirts of Rome. It is faint at first, muffled by distance, a low thrum like a heartbeat amplified through hollow wood. Then another joins it, sharper, metallic, clashing in syncopated rhythms. Cymbals, drums, a cadence unlike any ritual Rome has yet known. You follow the sound instinctively, weaving through streets that widen into unfamiliar terrain. The sun hovers high now, the city warm beneath its glow, but the air carries a strange coolness, an exotic breeze that seems to slip through alleys in defiance of the weather. Romans you pass turn their heads toward the noise. Some are curious, others frown. A few cross themselves in the old protective gesture meant to ward off wandering spirits. Whatever approaches, it is not a deity Rome has grown up with. It is a power from elsewhere. As the sound grows louder, the ground beneath your feet begins to vibrate with an almost ecstatic pulse. The rhythm possesses a wild, unrestrained energy that feels foreign to Rome's typically ordered ceremonial life. You reach the edge of the Palatine's lower slope, where the main road stretches toward the outer hills, and there, beyond a thin veil of dust, you see them. A procession unlike any Rome has ever hosted. At its centre stands a massive carved block of black stone, mounted on a decorated cart pulled by oxen whose horns shine with polished metal. Around the cart dance a group of attendants dressed in flowing garments dyed deep crimson and gold. Some carry small drums slung across their bodies, beating them with open palms. Others clash cymbals overhead, sending ringing waves into the sky. Their hair is braided with ribbons, their faces painted with symbols that Rome's citizens glance at with equal parts awe and alarm. This is the Magna Mater, Cybele, Great Mother of the Gods, travelling from the ancient world of Asia Minor, welcomed by decree of the Senate during a time of crisis. Her arrival is both remedy and rupture. She comes to strengthen Rome in its hour of need during the Punic Wars, yet she brings traditions so unlike Rome's that even now, as she draws near, the city's foundations seem to vibrate under the weight of her presence. You step closer to the road, letting the procession pass near you. The musicians sway as they play, their movements sinuous, almost trance-like. Their rhythm tugs at your body with a magnetic pull, inviting you to move with them. Yet something inside you hesitates, not out of fear, but because you can feel the city itself tense, unsure how to receive this goddess who refuses to be quiet or subtle. A high-pitched call cuts through the music, and a priestess steps forward at the front of the column. Her garments shimmer in the sunlight, embroidered with symbols of lions and mountains. Around her neck hangs a polished gemstone that catches the light in dazzling bursts. Her voice rises again, weaving words that sound ancient, older even than Rome's earliest myths. Though you cannot understand the language fully, the tone conveys urgency and reverence. The priestess gestures toward the black stone, the sacred meteorite believed to contain the very essence of the goddess, and the crowd murmurs, uneasy. Nobody in Rome has seen a god arrive like this before. You walk alongside the procession as it enters the city proper, and the reactions of the people become even more pronounced. Some fall to their knees in reverence, instinctively sensing the raw spiritual force passing before them. Others pull back as though confronted by something too powerful, too wild to be touched. A few whisper sharply, already questioning what place such a deity will hold in Rome's carefully ordered Pantheon. Historians still argue whether the Senate welcomed Cybele strictly as a political maneuver, hoping her presence would tip the scales in their war against Hannibal, or whether they genuinely believed the ancient oracle that declared her arrival essential to Rome's survival. But as you witness the procession, the debate feels almost moot. Whatever motivations brought her here, her presence is undeniable, transformative. The procession winds toward a temporary sanctuary prepared on the Palatine Hill. Here the drums intensify, the cymbals clash in rapid bursts, priestesses begin to dance around the stone, their movements fluid and fierce as though embodying the goddess's primal energy. You feel the air around you thicken, charged with a sensation that rises from the earth itself. Rome, in this moment, feels both ancient and suddenly very young, like a child encountering a force beyond its comprehension. One performer steps forward and begins to spin, her garments flaring outward like a whirl of fire. As she turns, the dust around her lifts into a miniature cyclone illuminated by the afternoon light. You realize this is not mere performance. It is invocation, a summoning of the goddess's attention, a plea for her to anchor herself in this land so far from her birthplace. The Romans watching are transfixed. You see a group of priests of Jupiter exchange uneasy glances. Their expressions reveal what many fear but will not say aloud. This goddess is powerful, perhaps too powerful. Her rituals are intense, emotional, ecstatic. The kind of devotion she inspires crosses boundaries Rome has long relied upon to maintain order. And yet she has been invited, formally, publicly, irrevocably. A group of young men, Romans by dress but followers of the new cult by expression, step into the centre of the circle. They wear veils and jewellery, their faces painted in ways that challenge Roman norms of masculinity. Their movements are deliberate, expressive, unrestrained. The crowd ripples with shock. Even now, centuries before the empire reaches its height, Rome is a city keenly aware of identity, hierarchy, and performance. And here, before all eyes, the cult of Cybele begins to unravel those threads. You watch one young man kneel before the meteorite, his hands trembling. He whispers words you cannot fully hear, but you feel the emotional weight of them. Gratitude, sorrow, release. Perhaps he comes to the goddess seeking healing from something Rome cannot mend. Perhaps he seeks transformation. The Magna Mater has always drawn those who feel themselves on the edge of society, the overlooked, the restless, the wounded. Then something unexpected happens. The air around the meteorite vibrates, softly at first, then with a growing hum. A warmth radiates outward, brushing against your skin. The drums stop abruptly as though sensing the shift. The priestess closest to the stone lowers her hands, her breath catching. The crowd leans in. You feel a pulse from the meteorite, a subtle rhythmic throb, like a heartbeat felt through stone. It is not loud, not dramatic, but deeply intimate, a whisper of presence. The priestess begins to sing, her voice trembling at first, then strengthening as the hum stabilizes. The melody is unlike anything Roman ears have heard, raw, quivering, layered in tones that resonate in your bones rather than your ears. She traces symbols in the air, her fingers glowing faintly with reflected light. For a moment, the entire hillside feels suspended, and then the pulse fades, gentle as exhaling. The crowd exhales with it. You realize that Rome has just experienced the goddess not as symbol, not as statue, but as presence. And whether the citizens are ready or not, they have begun a relationship that will endure for centuries. As the musicians resume their rhythm, slower now, more grounded, the priestesses escort the stone into its temporary sanctuary. The crowd disperses in murmurs, some excited, some unnerved, some already planning the debates that will ripple through the Senate by nightfall. You stand alone for a moment, feeling the earth beneath you still buzzing from the goddess's arrival. The city has shifted. Rome has welcomed something vast and unfamiliar, and though many fear her wildness, many will seek her strength in years to come. Already the cult of Cybele has woven itself into Rome's spiritual tapestry, adding complexity, tension, and beauty to the shape of worship. But as the drums quiet and the hillside settles, another force stirs in the distance, a different kind of power, cooler and more calculated, poised to intertwine divinity with politics in ways Rome has never seen. Venus Genetrix waits in the shadows of the future, ready to reshape the very notion of what it means to be Roman. You remain on the Palatine slope long after the procession of the Magna Mater disperses, listening to the fading echo of drums and cymbals rolling across the rooftops. The air still quivers with her foreign, untamed energy, and Rome seems momentarily stretched between two worlds, the familiar rhythm of civic ritual and the wild pulse of something newly arrived. But even as that intensity settles, you sense another presence unfurling across the city, quieter yet far more calculated. A different kind of divinity begins to ripple through Rome's consciousness, not with drums or ecstatic movement, but with lineage, ambition, and the subtle force of myth reshaped into political weaponry. It begins with a single name, Venus. Not simply Venus, goddess of love and beauty, but Venus Genetrix, Venus the mother, Venus the ancestor, Venus whose lineage will be claimed by a man destined to transform Rome forever. The sound of her name spreads through the city like a soft breeze, carried in whispers across marketplaces and carved into fresh tablets set up in public squares. You follow this shift, letting the murmurs guide you as you drift toward the heart of the Forum once more. But the Forum is different now. The morning bustle continues, yet an undercurrent of expectancy moves beneath it. You notice groups of citizens gathered near scaffoldings and half-finished porticos, their conversations leaning toward one topic: Julius Caesar. His influence sprawls across the city like a shadow, long, unmistakable, both reassuring and unsettling. Rome has known powerful leaders before, but none have woven divine ancestry into political authority with such skill. A senator passes near you, his expression tense as he speaks with a colleague. You catch fragments of their conversation. Claims descent from Aeneas, from the goddess herself. Can the people resist such a lineage? The colleague only shakes his head. No one resists a story that binds destiny to blood. You follow their line of sight and see it, rising near the Forum of Caesar, a new temple taking form under the hands of hundreds of workers. At first glance, the structure may seem only another addition to Rome's expanding architectural tapestry, but as you approach, you sense the difference immediately. The air shifts, quieting around you. Even unfinished, the Temple of Venus Genetrix emanates a kind of calculated grace. Each line of stone laid not only in devotion, but in strategy. You step closer, watching as artisans chisel delicate flowers into the marble frieze, their movements careful, reverent. The columns rise tall and slender, almost delicate compared to the robust Doric style common in earlier temples. Their smooth surfaces catch the sunlight with a gentle glow that seems to soften the entire building. The design is unmistakably elegant, a visual metaphor for the goddess it honours. Inside the construction zone, Caesar himself stands with several architects and priests. You can sense his presence even before you see him, an aura of intention, of decisions shaping the city's destiny. He points toward the cellar's inner wall where a sculptor carves the preliminary outline of a statue. The stone figure, though rough, already holds an aura of serene power. Venus sits poised, draped in a flowing garment, her head slightly inclined, as though considering her vast influence across mortal affairs. Caesar studies the statue as though inspecting his own reflection, but it is not vanity you see in his gaze, at least not solely. It is calculation, vision, understanding. He knows that Rome listens to stories, and so he writes one in marble, that he, Julius Caesar, is not merely a politician or general but a descendant of Aeneas, son of Venus. By honouring the goddess publicly, he weaves his personal lineage into Rome's mythic foundation, creating a narrative no rival can easily dislodge. Historians still argue whether Caesar truly believed in this divine ancestry, or wielded merely as political theatre. But as you watch him now, it seems entirely possible he believed both. Belief and strategy are not opposites here. They are tools of the same craft. The sculptor steps away from the statue, wiping dust from his hands. Caesar nods approvingly, then walks toward the temple's entrance. You follow at a respectful distance, sensing the conversation he begins with the priests. Their voices are low, but the intention is unmistakable. They are discussing the rituals that will inaugurate the temple upon completion. Sacrifices, hymns, processions. Caesar insists on details. Nothing must go amiss. This temple, perhaps more than any before it, is designed to embody both divine reverence and political messaging. As he turns away again, his gaze sweeps across the forum, and for a moment he seems to be measuring it, not as it is, but as it could be. The city is no longer simply a backdrop for his actions, it's becoming a reflection of his identity, shaped in stone, forged in narrative. You step into the shadow of the portico and feel the coolness embrace you. Inside the temple's future courtyard, workers assemble mosaics depicting scenes from the myth of Aeneas, the fall of Troy, the carrying of Anchises, the journey across the sea. These images anchor Caesar's claimed lineage in public memory. Every citizen who enters this sacred space will walk directly into his story. You kneel beside a mosaic in progress. Tiny tesserae, pieces of coloured stone, lie sorted in careful piles. Blues for the waves, reds for Troy's smouldering ruins, gold for divine light. A young artisan kneels beside the incomplete image, his brow furrowed with concentration. As he sets a piece into wet plaster, he murmurs to himself, practicing the sequence of the myth so he can keep the imagery accurate. His whisper carries across the tiles. Aeneas escapes because the gods will roam into being. You realise how neatly the myth supports Caesar's narrative. If Aeneas survived because Rome was destined, then Caesar, as Aeneas' descendant, becomes part of that destiny. A living thread in a tapestry woven by the gods. You rise and walk deeper into the sanctuary. At the back of the cellar, the statue of Venus becomes clearer. Though still unfinished, her expression is starting to emerge, serene, watchful, endlessly patient. Her hand is extended, palm upward, not in command but in invitation, a symbol of lineage, a gesture of protection, a reminder that Rome's future flows not only from its laws and battles but from its stories. A gentle breeze moves across the room, stirring a thin veil of marble dust that floats in soft spirals. As the light catches the particles, they shimmer like tiny fragments of starlight, fitting given Venus's celestial nature. You approach the statue until you stand directly before her. Though she is stone, you feel a subtle pull, as though an unseen thread connects you to her presence. A single whisper forms at the edge of your consciousness, not a voice exactly, but a sensation. Destiny is a story told by those brave enough to claim it. You step back, letting the insight settle into your breath. Caesar re-enters the cellar, his footsteps confident but not hurried. He walks toward the statue, placing his hand briefly upon the edge of the pedestal. It is a gesture small enough to escape notice, yet from where you stand it feels extraordinarily intimate. He closes his eyes for a moment. Is he communing with the goddess, or contemplating the future? The line between those questions grows thin in this temple. When he opens his eyes again, he looks not at the statue but at the city beyond the doorway. You sense the momentum of something profound gathering around him. The future forum of Caesar, the restructuring of Rome's power, the reshaping of divine narratives to bolster earthly authority. The temple behind him radiates its significance. Venus Genetrix is not a goddess who arrives with drums or ecstatic frenzy. She arrives with lineage, with legacy, with inevitability. Workers begin clearing tools for the day, their movements creating a gentle background rhythm. The sunlight shifts across the marble floor, stretching long, luminous bands toward the back of the sanctuary. You stand in the glow, absorbing the atmosphere as it begins to settle into calm once more. Caesar departs with his entourage, his footsteps echoing down the portico. The goddess remains, radiant and still, shaping the future even in her half-formed state. You step outside into the late afternoon light, feeling the city breathe around you. Rome has always been a place of many gods, but today you witnessed a new kind of worship. Divinity braided deliberately into politics, myth crafted into identity. And as the warmth of the day begins to dim, you sense another architectural marvel calling you forward, one whose grandeur will eclipse even Caesar's ambitions. A dome impossible, a temple timeless. The Pantheon waits in the unfolding dusk. You leave the Forum of Caesar in a wash of fading sunlight, the last golden beams brushing across the marble like fingers tracing the contours of memory. Venus Genetrix recedes behind you, her promise of lineage and destiny lingering like a whispered vow. Yet the path ahead begins to widen, not physically, but in imagination. Rome stretches before you, not just outward through its forums and markets, but upward, towards something more daring, more expansive, more impossible. You walk through quiet streets that bear the gentle noises of evening, merchants closing shutters, children chasing each other in dusty alleys, the distant echo of a senator's laughter from a portico. But above these mortal sounds, another rhythm begins to make itself known, an architectural pulse, the heartbeat of a structure not yet in view, but already altering the air. You follow that pulse, letting it guide you like a distant drum, until the buildings fall away and the sky opens. And there it is, rising before you with serene confidence, the Pantheon. Even from afar, its dome seems to defy the logic of gravity, curving across the sky like a fragment of the heavens lowered gently to earth. You pause, not out of hesitation, but because the sight requires it. Your breath steadies. The ground seems to soften beneath your feet. The structure draws you forward, immense and ancient, yet strangely modern in its perfection. The approach is almost ceremonial. First, the portico reveals itself. 8 massive Corinthian columns of the Egyptian granite rising in perfect alignment, their capitals catching the twilight in soft glints. Each column is so broad that a single person could not encircle it with both arms. They stand like guardians, quiet but formidable, welcoming you into a space that feels both earthly and cosmic. Historians still debate the temple's deeper mystery, how such a dome was engineered with the tools of its time, What precise mathematical genius made its weight float effortlessly above empty space? Some attribute the design entirely to Agrippa, whose name adorns the portico. Others insist Hadrian rebuilt it with innovations so advanced that even modern architects pause in wonder. Yet as you approach the portico, it becomes clear that such debates, though fascinating, barely capture the building's essence. The Pantheon is not simply a feat of engineering, it is a gesture of reverence toward the cosmos itself. You step beneath the portico. The temperature cools instantly, the stone beneath your feet radiating the memory of shadows. The space hums with the quiet footfalls of centuries. Even without entering the rotunda, the air feels different here, dense with expectation. The bronze doors, tall as two men stacked atop each other, stand slightly ajar. You lay your palm against one, half expecting the metal to resist. Instead, it yields with surprising ease, pivoting inward with a low, resonant groan. And then the world changes. You step inside and the interior engulfs you in silence. Deep, soft, almost liquid. All around you the rotunda expands in perfect symmetry, the walls curving upward in a gentle sweep until they dissolve into the dome, which arches above like a sky sculpted from stone. The oculus, a circular opening at its peak, gazes downward like an unblinking eye of daylight, or starlight depending on the hour. You tilt your head back. The oculus frames the sky with such precision that the heavens seem somehow closer, as though you've entered the boundary between human architecture and divine space. A beam of light pours through the opening, falling in a perfect column that shifts slowly across the interior as the earth rotates beneath it. Dust motes drift through the beam like tiny planets orbiting an unseen sun. The dome above you is lighter than it appears. Its coffers, sunken geometric panels, recede in an ordered pattern, reducing weight while creating the illusion of greater height. You trace their pattern with your eyes, following the careful rhythm of squares that diminish in size as they climb, drawing your gaze upward until you feel suspended between the floor and infinity. You walk into the beam of light and feel its warmth settle on your shoulders. For a moment, your shadow stretches behind you like the outline of someone stepping into another world. Slowly you begin to circle the rotunda. Each niche houses a deity, or in later centuries emperors whose divinity Rome chose to assert. Statues watch you with expressions both serene and commanding. The marble floors beneath your feet ripple with patterns of coloured stone. Porphyry reds, deep greens of serpentine, pale yellows of ancient limestone. They form a geometric tapestry reflecting the dome above, grounding the cosmic design into earthly material. You pause near a column and rest your hand against its surface. The marble is cool, unyielding, yet holds an almost living texture. You can feel centuries of footsteps, prayers and whispers resonating faintly within it. This is not a temple built simply for worship, it is built to embody the harmony between Rome and the universe. It is a sanctuary where earth meets sky, where human ingenuity meets divine symmetry. A faint echo stirs, a voice not directed at you but carried through the air like a memory. You turn and see a priest standing near the central altar, adjusting offerings of fruit and incense. His movements are methodical, shaped by repetition. He glances upward at the oculus, and the light catches his face, illuminating a quiet awe that no ritual familiarity can erase. Even those who serve here daily never fully escape the Pantheon's pull. He murmurs something, a word you cannot quite discern, but its tone conveys gratitude, reverence, and perhaps a touch of humility. How could one not feel humility beneath this dome? Even emperors reportedly entered with softened hearts. You move closer to the centre of the room, letting the vastness settle into your breath. Standing beneath the oculus, you realise that rain sometimes falls here, drifting in gentle arcs, collecting in small drainage channels, hidden expertly in the floor. The architecture accounts for everything: light, shadow, weather, the movement of time. The dome seems to breathe with the day. You close your eyes, the silence deepens. When you open them again, the Pantheon feels subtly transformed. The beam of light has shifted. It now illuminates a statue of Mars. The god stands poised in quiet power, the light sharpening the plane of his cheekbone, the curve of his shield. It is as though the sun itself has chosen to bless him for a moment. Then slowly the beam moves on. You follow it with your gaze, watching as it sweeps across the rotunda, touching one divinity after another, equalizing them in light's democratic grace. You begin to understand something the temple maybe never stated but always implied, that all gods are part of a singular cosmic system, not separate, not competing, but threads within a larger tapestry. No wonder the architecture feels so impossibly perfect. You continue your slow walk, letting your footsteps echo softly. You imagine Hadrian standing where you stand, surveying his masterpiece with the satisfaction of someone who has translated celestial geometry into stone. You imagine Agrippa before him, envisioning a temple grand enough to honour all gods and justify his victories. You imagine the countless Romans, patricians, slaves, priests, travellers, who have stepped beneath the dome and felt themselves connected to something far greater than the city outside. Historians still debate which elements belong to Agrippa's design and which to Hadrian's reconstruction, but that debate dissolves in this space. What remains is the effect, the way the temple holds Rome within a sphere of divine possibility. You step back into the centre once more and allow your eyes to settle on the oculus again. The sky framed there has deepened into evening, the blue darkening at the edges. A single star appears, small but unblinking. You realise it is the same star the Romans associated with Venus, a quiet thread tying this moment back to Caesar's temple, to lineage, to myth. The Pantheon gathers it all. Slowly, you move toward the bronze doors again. As you step outside, the night settles around the portico, and the dome behind you glows faintly beneath the sky, its geometry still pulsing, its vastness still echoing within your ribs. You walk onward, breathing deeply. Ahead, Rome's streets twist into quieter neighbourhoods, and a different kind of temple begins to stir in your imagination, one not built for triumph or lineage, but for the fragile universal longing for healing. A sanctuary where Romans sought dreams, cures, and whispered signs from the gods of medicine. A place of hope. The temples of Aesculapius await in the soft, unfolding dark. You walk away from the Pantheon, with its cosmic breath still lingering in your lungs, the echo of its perfect geometry gently fading as you move through narrowing streets. The evening has softened into a blue-grey hush. Lamps spill warm circles of light across doorways, and the distant hum of conversation drifts lazily above the stone pathways. Yet beneath these familiar sounds you sense another rhythm, subtler, more intimate, shaped not by triumph or cosmic grandeur but by longing, the longing to heal, to be restored, to understand one's body and fate in a world where illness arrives as suddenly as storms. Rome has always looked to the gods for protection in battle, for victory in politics, for cosmic alignment. But when sickness strikes, when fevers burn through homes, when plagues slip through streets like shadows, Romans turn to a different sanctuary. Not a temple crowned in gold or triumph, but one built on quiet trust between mortals and divinity. The sanctuary of Aesculapius. You feel its pull even before the city thins into the open space near the Tiber. A scent of river reeds and damp earth rises from the ground, mingling with the smoke from torches lining the path. The breeze here is cooler, as though carrying the faint memory of healing herbs. You follow the curve of the riverbank toward the small island that rests at the river's centre. Tiber Island, shaped uncannily like a ship when lanterns reflect along the water's edges. Climbing the short footbridge, you hear whispers carried on the wind. Not words exactly, but the soft murmur of countless supplicants who have crossed these waters before you. Some came seeking relief from fever, some for visions that might reveal the cure, some for signs of whether a loved one would live or die, and some for peace when cures were no longer possible. When you reach the island's landing, the sound sharpens into more distinct voices, low conversations, soft weeping, quiet prayers whispered into the hands held over hearts. Torches flicker along a path leading upward toward the sanctuary. You begin to see figures moving slowly in small groups, many wrapped in woolen cloaks despite the mild night. Their faces appear exhausted, marked by the strain of long illness or sleepless nights watching over the sick. Yet the moment you step onto the island's central path, a sense of calm settles around you. This is not the calm of silence nor the calm of celestial awe. It is the calm of shared vulnerability, the kind of place where suffering is not hidden or shamed, but acknowledged and held gently. Ahead rises the Temple of Aesculapius. Its facade is elegant but not ostentatious. Columns of pale stone flank the entrance, their capitals carved with intertwined serpents, the sacred symbol of the healing god. The serpents are not menacing, but serene, their bodies curving gracefully, their heads lifted in perpetual vigilance. In the torchlight they seem almost to move, as though alive with quiet purpose. You step toward the entrance, passing a group of physicians standing just outside the doorway. Their tablets are tucked under their arms, their robes bearing the stains of herbs and balms. They speak softly, discussing symptoms of a recent fever sweeping one of the lower districts. Though trained in medicine, they look toward the temple for guidance beyond their skill. Here, the boundary between science and spirituality dissolves. Healing is partnership, not conflict. As you enter, a warm, resinous smell greets you. Incense burns at small altars along the walls, coiling into soft spirals that float toward the rafters. The interior glows in bronze and amber hues, the light reflecting off polished surfaces that feel almost like water. At the centre of the sanctuary stands the statue of Aesculapius, tall, bearded, serene, one hand holding a staff around which a single serpent climbs. You stand before him, sensing a presence unlike the other gods you've encountered so far. Aesculapius does not demand tribute. He does not boast power. He simply offers stillness, as though listening intently to every unspoken ache within the chamber. His stone eyes possess a kind of gentle clarity, and you feel as though he sees both the suffering and the resilience of those who come seeking him. Patients lie on low couches arranged around the interior, attendants tending to their needs with quiet efficiency. Some individuals appear deeply asleep, others watch the statue with eyes full of hope or fear. You realize this place is not only a temple, it is a hospital, a sanctuary where the line between ritual and treatment weaves seamlessly. A priest approaches you, carrying a woven basket of herbs, laurel, rosemary, mint. He dips his hand into a nearby bowl of water, murmuring a blessing as he sprinkles droplets onto the basket. You recognize the scent immediately. Fresh, potent, invigorating. The herbs will be burned later, their smoke released during the night ritual, when supplicants are encouraged to sleep within the sanctuary to await temple dreams. Incubation, the priests call it, the divine practice of sleeping in Aesculapius's presence to receive visions that reveal the path to healing. You move deeper into the sanctuary until you find a place where the floor opens into a mosaic depicting a serpent coiled around a chalice. The tiles shimmer in warm tones of green and gold. You kneel to observe it more closely and feel a soft vibration through the stone. Not physical exactly, but emotional. This mosaic has witnessed countless moments of desperate hope. People have knelt here for centuries, pressing their palms to the tiles, whispering their sickness into the stone as though surrendering their burden. You close your eyes briefly, touching the mosaic with the tips of your fingers, and a faint impression washes over you, a memory not your own. Someone once knelt here, trembling with fear that their child would not survive the winter fever. They prayed through the night until their voice cracked. They lay down upon a couch beneath the statue and dreamed of a serpent curling gently around their wrist, leading them to a wellspring of clean, cold water. In the morning, the child's fever broke. Whether coincidence or miracle, the story lived on in the family for generations. You open your eyes, and a quiet hush fills the room as the priests begin preparing for the night's ritual. One priest lights a larger brazier near the statue, its flames rising with a sudden warmth that bathes the entire sanctuary in golden light. Another begins chanting in a low, soothing tone, invoking Aesculapius's presence. The chant moves like a slow wave from priest to priest, spreading across the room until the entire chamber resonates with a rhythm that feels more like breath than sound. A young woman enters the temple, carried gently by two relatives. Her eyes are closed, her brow slick with sweat. The priests guide her to one of the couches near the statue. Her relatives kneel beside her, their hands trembling as they whisper thanks to the god before stepping back. A priest places a soft cloth soaked in herbal tincture across her forehead. Another priest adjusts the small lamp beside her couch, ensuring the flame glows steadily through the night. You watch her chest rise and fall, each breath uneven but determined. The chanting grows softer, as though cradling the room. Patients settle into their couches, lamps dim in gradual sequence. The sanctuary darkens into a twilight illuminated only by the slow pulse of the brazier. You feel yourself sinking into the atmosphere, drawn into the collective vulnerability and hope that fills the chamber. The presence of Aesculapius wraps around you like a warm cloth, soothing your thoughts, softening your breath. Then, just as the chanting fades to a gentle hum, you feel something shift within the space, not movement, but attention. The air grows perceptibly warmer near the statue. The flames of the brazier flicker toward it. For a moment you sense a consciousness, calm, steady, profoundly compassionate, ripple outward like a silent tide. No ecstatic frenzy, no thunder, no spectacle, just presence. A priest notices the shift and bows his head. Another crosses his hands over his chest. A patient near the wall sighs in her sleep, her body relaxing as though an unseen hand has smoothed the tension from her limbs. The sanctuary holds the moment tenderly, and then, slowly, the sensation fades again, leaving behind only warmth, only quiet, only the steady breath of those resting in its care. You remain for a while longer, feeling the temple's peace settle into the bones of the night. Eventually you step outside, the cool air brushing your face. Across the water, Rome glows softly, unaware that healing has begun within this island's embrace. Yet beyond the river you sense something else waking, something more secretive, more shadowed, carried on eastern winds and whispered in underground chambers. Temples not of civic celebration or healing dreams, but of hidden rites, Isis, Mithras, and the many gods who thrive in Rome's twilight.